Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Problem. Where are you located at? Like I tried checking online. There's various Seattle, Massachusetts, Rhode Island. Where are you at?
I am living in Massachusetts at the
Okay, so you're
moment.
living in Mass. Okay, cool.
Yeah,
Because
I lived in Rhode Island for a couple of years, and then I lived in Seattle for about 20 years.
okay, that's just what I
So
thought.
I
Because
have lived all places, but Massachusetts is where I'm at now.
I know it's like trying to get you
Hmm.
like the updated information on the internet where one says one thing and the other is like another. I was like, I need to get to know like where are you actually at this current. That's so funny. That's great, dude. Cool, cool, man. How's everything going for you?
Good. New Year's off to a good start. Had a nice holiday break and got some rest, and we'll see
Good.
how long that refreshed feeling lasts.
Oh, I know. That's usually how it goes. For us, we just got snowed in today. So we've been I live in Missouri, so we just got hit with all this snow right now. So we're just trying to stay warm and stay, just tucked in and, trying to enjoy this time while we can. So
Sure.
yeah.
How much
Um,
snow did you get?
oh my gosh, I think it's still going right now. We live kind of more near, let's see, it's probably about 45 minutes outside of St. Louis. So I think we're supposed to get up to 9 to 12 inches of
Oh
snow.
my God.
Yeah. Yeah. So,
Is Missouri equipped for that sort
oh,
of thing?
yeah. Oh, yeah.
They
Yeah.
are? Okay.
So, yeah, I mean, I think higher up, like Minnesota, they're used to having all kinds of snow. So it kind of varies for us where sometimes we'll get snow, sometimes we won't. And they're not always accurate. So they'll be like, oh my God, here comes the snow. And then we'll get like a dusting or something like that.
Right.
So, but I think further down, they're getting ice right now. So like they're getting snow and ice, and we're just getting just caked full of snow right now. So
Well,
I
choosing between the two, I'll take the snow.
yeah, we ain't going nowhere. We ain't going nowhere for a while. So um anyways, so you got the Helix EP going on. You have a Toronto show in February. Yeah, tell me what else is going on for you.
For the past year, I've been working on a new album. Um, it's been a while since Morn came out.
Yeah.
And, we had the Failure 20th anniversary edition in between that. But
Yeah.
so I've just been spending the last year or so writing and trying to come up with a group of songs that I feel show promise and can be developed into something interesting.
Yeah.
Um, Generally, I'll gather ideas, as they come to me, and then I'll go back to those folders of ideas and revisit them at a later date and start to kind of separate the wheat from the chaff and figure out like what sounds like it could actually turn into something interesting and what is maybe doesn't have that potential. So I've just been going through that process, and uh, honestly, a lot of the songs, probably about three-quarters of them, are musically pretty much finished.
Oh, good.
Uh, so then it'll be, but going from here forward, most of the work is going to be lyric writing, vocal recording, and the whole final production and mixing stage.
I know you just got done with Gone, and that's supposed to be on a Metropolis compilation. Is that right?
Yeah, as probably some of your listeners know who are familiar with Metropolis Records, Dave Heckman, who was the founder of Metropolis Records, passed away last year. Well, 2 years ago, I guess now technically.
Yeah.
Um, and his daughter and his wife have kind of taken the reins and have been doing an amazing job. Actually, I feel as if they're kind of breathing some new life into the
I
label
know, I
there.
agree. Yeah.
Um, and they wanted to do, like a lot of people that work in the music industry. Dave had a drinking problem,
Yep.
and so the idea behind this compilation is to raise money for a place called Passengers, which
Mhm.
is um, started by one of the guys from the band Electric Six.
Yep.
And it's aimed at offering resources and information and assistance for musicians who are on the road, who are either in recovery or need to get into recovery.
Yeah, absolutely.
And I think that's an amazing idea, and I can't believe that it hasn't been really done prior to this, at least not to my awareness,
Yeah.
because it's I don't think it's a secret. That's a big problem. You know, a lot of a lot of people, and the road is the perfect environment
Hmm.
to foster that sort of thing, because yeah, you're doing shows and having a lot of fun and stuff like that, but there's a lot of just sitting around and waiting for stuff to happen.
Yeah.
And some people, you know, fill that with drugs or booze or, you know, other unhealthy behaviors. And when you're not at home and you're in an unfamiliar place, it you don't really have a place to get help. So the idea behind the compilation is to kind of raise money in Dave's memory for something positive that will be hopefully beneficial to touring musicians. It's a badly needed resource, and I'm glad that somebody's kind of taken the mantle there.
Yeah, absolutely. The Metropolis compilations have always kind of been my stepping stone into learning more about other industrial artists, where they used to have the Metropolis compilations, I think starting in like 2000s, and they kind of still kind of did their thing. And then they also did Electronic Salvation, where it was for
Electronic Saviors.
yeah, Selected Saviors. That's it. Thank you. And I might have a song coming up on the new one. I'm not sure. I didn't really get confirmation yet. They kind of started it the submission process kind of early last year, and so now we're kind of waiting. So I don't know about that yet. But anyway, so with the compilations, when you know that's how I found you. That's how I found a lot of other artists on Metropolis, and I think it's good that they're keeping that tradition going because I think a lot of people can go in and for me, compilations have always been my way of, you know, whatever record label it may be. It's like you're learning all these different artists, and I wish they would just keep it going. And I'm glad they're keeping this going, as well as keeping the foundations going where they're taking money and donating it to whatever charity that they, and I think that's fantastic, especially for someone who is a big part of Metropolis Records. And it's amazing. I can't wait to hear what you got going on to that.
Oh, thanks.
Tell me about the
So
song though.
compilations have really kind of died out, and I mean it's understandably why. It's like now we have streaming, you have every song ever released.
I know.
You know, I mean, I guess you could argue playlists have kind of replaced compilations in terms of kind of curated collections of songs that are meant to introduce you to new artists. But yeah, that was a big part of me when I was getting into this kind of music, of especially because you know, not to date myself, but this was a very long time ago, and it was hard to get a lot of the European labels didn't really have the presence in the United States that they have now, and finding out about that stuff was so hard. So if you could, you know, you're already paying like $25 for an import CD at that point, and you don't want to just go blindly buy some random artist that you may have heard of and not know if, oh, maybe there's one good song and the album sucks. It's much better to spend your money on a compilation and find out hopefully about a bunch of new artists that you want to check out. But yeah, it's nice to kind of, you know, I guess it's arguably kind of an old school idea, but I still like the idea, especially when it's a bunch of artists coming together to kind of do something collectively that's helpful.
What inspired the song "Gone" for you when you're working on that song?
Um, you know, I'm 53 years old now, and one of the crappy things about getting older that you don't really think about when you're younger is that um, you know, the list of the people that you know who've died just grows and grows, and that starts to become exponential as you get older naturally. Gone is about sort of the shock that the living go through when you realize that person's no longer there to communicate with. And I think um, we've all had that experience before, where somebody close to us passes away and we see something that reminds us of that person, be like, oh, I got to tell them about and then you kind of relive that shock again. So that's kind of what Gone is about, is about that, the feeling when somebody is no longer around, that frustration of not being able to communicate, and just not having their presence in your life. And that's a big adjustment. I think there's a saying, the death is only sad for the living. And so that's kind of the inspiration for the song.
Well, with your album, your latest album, latest meaning the most, Mourn, you put that out around COVID time, and a lot of the themes of the songs really helped me get through the loss of people who've died post, COVID and all that stuff. Where I mean, it was just seemed like so many people were just dropping, and it was scary and it was sad, and you forget. And I love Mourn as a way it really helped me kind of cope and understand about losing people. And that kind of has been like a theme throughout a lot of your throughout your like discography. But Mourn, that definitely hit. Tell me about working on that one as well.
Yeah, I mean, doing an album during a pandemic was a very strange experience. I mean, in some ways, it was positive because it's like, well, what else are you going to do? It's
I
like just get in the studio and work, because you can't, everything's closed, you can't go anywhere. But the atmosphere was very strange. And a lot of the inspiration behind Mourn came out of my divorce, and it was the end of a relationship. And but I think it kind of applies, like you said, you were talking about how, what you took away from it were some things you could relate to with people that you'd lost. And I think it's this, whether you're mourning the end of a relationship, or the life of a person, it's kind of the same process, and you kind of go through the same stages of denial and acceptance, and all of that sort of thing. So it's actually, it's hard for me to listen to now, because not only does it just bring up a lot of negative feelings about what inspired it, but also the time that it was created was also a pretty grim time too. So that's kind of a double decker sandwich of grimness.
get it.
um, but yeah, so it was just a matter of sitting down in the studio, and making use of the time that I had that couldn't be occupied by anything else. And I guess in terms of productivity, it was it was the positive thing, if you want to look for
Yeah, you got
something.
to stay positive in those situations where it's like you can, I mean, a lot of us, we kind of go into like a default mode where if we're locked in a house, most people are going to watch streaming stuff or just kind of stay in this state where, most of us who are active creatively, I mean, of course, you got to have that sort of balance, but a lot of it's like, okay, I'm going to drive myself nuts if I don't work on something, work on an album, work
Yeah.
on remix, work on music, and even then it's like, fuck, I got to work out. I got to be more active. Like it was one of those times where it was just, it was crazy. And I think, you know, I was talking about this on another podcast where it was like, we, we got so used to that time, and then now we think, oh, you remember back in COVID, where I feel like we haven't, we got to learn from our mistakes and learn to enjoy the times we have, and enjoy, let's start getting creative again, and go out and see people live and stuff, because at the time people are like, oh my god, I haven't seen a live show and blah blah blah, blah, and it's like,
Mhm.
but we need to hold on to those moments and go, let's just keep it going, let's stay active, let's stay creative, let's go out and go see a show and all this other stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I was really thankful to have a creative outlet during a time like that. I can't imagine experiencing something like the pandemic without something like that to occupy your time. So I was very thankful for it, but I'd also be thankful if I never had to do another album under those conditions again, because that was just a really rough couple of years. I think just mentally for everybody that those 2 years, a couple of years was really rough. But you make the best of it that you can.
Absolutely. Tell me about working on Helix with Mary. Is it Mary or is it Marie? Am I saying that wrong?
Mary, yep.
Okay, good. I just want to make sure I wasn't saying it wrong. But yeah, tell me about
Yeah. So I mean, I've known Mary for I don't know, like 12, it's probably almost 15 years now.
yeah.
But initially she had been involved in a project called Day 12, and
Mhm.
they reached out to me about doing a remix for them.
Yeah.
And I listened to it and I was like, holy shit, this girl can really sing. Like, she really has a voice. And I'm not trying to be disrespectful, but this is not a scene that's known for great vocal performances, generally speaking. So it really, really made an impression. And I mentioned that to the guy who was working on the music, like, hey, you got something really good here.
Oh,
Like,
rare. Yeah.
it's not something that's super common.
Mhm.
And I guess he had talked to her and she reached out and thanked me, and we ended up talking and realized we had a lot in common. And I was working on a remix for another band. Or no, I'm sorry, it was a track for a Vardensphere
Okay.
where
Cool.
he asked me to do a guest vocal.
Mhm.
And so I wrote the vocal, and at the chorus, I was like, this isn't cutting through. What this needs is, it needs another vocal that's like an octave higher, but I can't sing that high.
Yeah.
Who do I know who could sing
Right.
that high? And so I reached out and asked if she'd do it, and she nailed it. And there were a couple times that I worked on remixes that I reached out to her to get her to do some backing vocals. And it got to the point where I was like, why aren't we doing our own
Right.
music? Why are we just working together on other people's stuff? So I had I had some songs that were laying around that were a bit more down tempo and were not really appropriate for A23. They would have kind of stuck out. So I just sent her one and I was like, see what you can do with this. And like in a day or two, something crazy fast, she sent it to me and it's perfect. I'm like, okay, this is something that I think we need to explore more. So yeah, so that's the way it started. And at the time, Mary was just really solely a vocalist. But during the pandemic, one of the things that she did was she started to teach herself to do songwriting, music production, and all that sort of stuff. So the balances shifted a bit. It started out where it was like I did all the music and the production, and she did the lyrics and the vocals. But now, she's contributing musically as well. And there's certainly some overlap in the aesthetic between that and Assemblage 23, especially on the more dancey tracks. But it's good to get to do something that's a bit outside my usual kind of thing. Also great to not have to worry about writing lyrics or vocals myself. Like, I can just concentrate on the music. And I mean, Mary, I think is just phenomenally talented. I'm really I feel really fortunate to get to work with her. And um, I'm not somebody who generally likes to collaborate a whole lot, because I feel like nobody's ever really super happy, because if
Yeah.
you always have to compromise, nobody's totally happy with the end result. So but we have our differences for sure, and we'll have it out about things that we disagree with until we can come to an agreement. But for the most part, the process is really effortless. It's a lot of fun.
It's awesome. And I know, I mean, there's definitely some sound differences between A23 and Helix. Did it feel like you were able to use Helix and go, okay, I can go beyond what I'm used to playing with A23 and kind of diving into, other genres? Did you kind of experience that at the process?
Yeah, I mean, I've always, whether it doesn't necessarily clobber you over the head with it, but I do take influences from a lot of different genres and stuff like that. And apply them to A23. But for instance, like I like a lot of dub production, like the old tape echoes and stuff like that. I'll use those on synths and stuff, and it won't necessarily, nobody's gonna mistake it for a King Tubby record from Jamaica or anything, but it's the same aesthetic. It's the same. I like that, the decaying echoes and the kind of gritty sound for it. So, but I always, being a musician is a perpetual learning process, or it
Mhm.
should be. And so every time I work on something, whether it's A23 or Helix or a remix for somebody else, I'm learning something that I can apply to a future project. So even if there isn't, bleed through musically, there's like production techniques or little tricks like that that you learn to make things sound better. It all influences each other in the end, and each project makes the other project better, just through that effort of learning and applying new stuff.
Awesome. Yeah. And I could see where you're coming from with that. And I know you guys have been on, were you on tour or are you going on tour now as Helix? Or are you guys are sharing the headline or whatever. You know what I'm talking about?
Yeah, I one of the big changes in my life from the pandemic was, uh, you know, for most bands, the performing live is where the majority of your money is coming from.
Oh yeah.
Certainly, you can make a good living from streaming, but it's a bit of a moonshot.
Oh yeah.
It's not common for the average artist. And with that gone, I was like, okay, I need to make a change here. And so I went back to working a day job.
Oh, okay.
And so that's really restricted the amount of live shows that I can do. So we've been kind of doing festivals and one-offs, on the weekends and stuff where we can. And we've been doing, especially this last year, we've been doing these kind of double headers where Helix opens for Assemblage 23.
Cool.
And it's been really good. It's been a really positive uh, way of kind of introducing people who might not have heard of Helix to the music, and we've really seen a dramatic uptick in our in the fan base for Helix just since getting out and doing live shows more, because that's, along with compilations and hearing a song in a club, that's another great way to discover a new band, is you go see a band you like and there's an opener that you're not familiar with, and you're like, oh wow, these guys are awesome.
Right. I know you guys played Finland for the first time. Tell me about that.
It was great. I mean, I love to travel and to see different places. And even though, we have, I always noticed, through merch sales and stuff like that through my website, that it's like we had a fair amount of a fan base in Finland, and
Oh,
we just were never able to get something to work. So we managed to make something to work when we were already going over for Mara Luna, and it was fantastic. I mean, Helsinki is a beautiful city, and it's very walkable. It has a very young atmosphere. Lots of really hip places to go, like eat and drink, um, and it was it's a small scene there, so it's not like in Germany or something like that where you're playing for these big crowds, but the energy was so great. And as a performer, that's one of the things that I really enjoy the most. Almost, of course it's great to play a big festival where you're playing for 5,000-8,000 people or whatever, and but I almost prefer playing places that don't get shows very often,
yeah, I know what you
because
mean.
people are so excited that you're there. I mean, I love I love playing in New York City, but there's like, when you're playing there, there's like 8 other things those people could be doing, and nobody is impressed by you.
Right.
But you go somewhere, uh, you know, even when we're in the U.S., when we're on tour, you can't just play big cities. You have to stop at some of those smaller places in the middle to make business sense. And those shows often turn out to be the best ones, because people are like, "Oh my God, I can't believe you came here!" And they're so excited and they're so energized, and it's really fun doing shows like that. But Yeah, to get back to the original question, Finland was fantastic, and we'd really like to go back.
Yeah. Did you get to like, is it like a quick go in, do a show, leave, or were you able to kind of hang out and kind of take in the scenery and everything like that?
That's the unfortunate part about touring is you always just get a taste
Yeah.
everywhere you go. And that was kind of the way it was. We got in. We took a red eye flight out of Boston. And we got there the following morning, and then it wasn't until the next evening that we had our show. So, we got there, ate some food, and went to bed, and then we had a good part of the next day to kind of wander around Helsinki and see the sights. So that was nice.
Awesome. Good. That sounds fantastic, man. So kind of going into like the history, I'm not going to try and keep repeating the same questions that everyone's kind of asked you. But in the beginning, you kind of became self-taught pianist. Did you want to do piano, or was it just kind of one of those things where it was like, you just kind of was like, oh, I'll take up an instrument, and piano was kind of the first, kind of pick.
Yeah, I when I was in about second grade, I tried guitar, but I really didn't have the discipline at that age for it to really take.
Hurts the fingers.
But yeah, I'll be honest. Like guitar still doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. For
Right.
some reason, the layout of a keyboard is just
That,
jibes with my brain
that's how
more.
I am too. Yeah, I get it. So,
But yeah, I mean, for me, I guess it was more just because keyboard is kind of the de facto controller for a synthesizer, and I got very interested in synthesizers. As soon as I figured out what it was, I'd heard them on records, and I was like, "What is making that sound? That's so cool!"
yes.
And so then when I figured it out, then okay, that's what I want. So I saved up a bunch of money. I bought my first synth,
What was
and
it? You don't mind me asking.
it was a Korg Poly 800
Oh,
with
nice.
um it's not without its charms, but
Right.
it's uh it's not going to make anybody's top 10 greatest synths of all time list. We'll put it that way. But it was I taught myself sound programming and MIDI, and the longer process was learning to play, and I didn't have a lot of technique and a lot of music theory and stuff like that. But the flip side of that was the positive, is that I developed a really good ear. So I can hear stuff and I can figure out how to play it pretty quickly, which is, for me as a musician, is a really valuable skill to have, because you hear like a melody in your head and you're like, now how do I get this
How am I
out
gonna?
and it's into my computer so I don't lose this idea. And so having that skill allows me to do that pretty fast. And that's much more useful to me than being able to sight read sheet music or something like that.
That's how I was. I was self learner. Like I started out doing drums, and I had a drum teacher, and he's like, "Okay, here's trying to." I was like, "I don't. I just want to play rock. Can I just play rock music? You know what I mean?" And even stuff I brought into him, a lot of it was done. He's like, most of this stuff is a drum machine, because I was doing like industrial and stuff, and I was
Right.
like, I want to learn it. Like so, learning self taught on drums, and then being more self taught on keyboards and synthesizers. It's right up my alley, so I understand completely. So
The interesting thing about that is that now that electronic music has been around for decades and decades now, you'll see on YouTube like some of these younger drummers who drum in like electronic styles.
yes,
So there's these guys who will do like live jungle or
bass.
drum and bass
Oh,
stuff, or who do stuff that where they're trying to sound machine like, and it's like it seems counterintuitive because drums are so expressive, and why would you want to do that? But I would almost argue that almost takes more skill
I think
to
it.
play with that kind of precision and evenness. Like people always used to make fun of Charlie Watts from the Rolling Stones because he was just a very basic, but
Basic.
he's a great drummer. I mean, he's so tight and he's so precise. And so it's interesting to see how, when drum machines and stuff like that originally came out, there was this huge backlash from the drumming community.
Have no soul. Yeah, I remember hearing all that.
Yeah, because everybody was afraid that these,
Yeah.
drum machines are going to take our jobs, which seems ridiculous now, right? Because a drum machine's never going to sound like Stuart Copeland or Neil Peart or but now to see the tables have kind of turned to that, where like people are like, now let's imitate what people did with these drum recordings and chop them up and stuff like that, and do it with real drums. I think that's pretty cool.
Yeah, it's fantastic. I know you were influenced. You saw Music for the Masses live tour with Depeche Mode. Oh my gosh, that's got to be an amazing story to tell. Because I watched the 101 DVD, and then
Mm.
they had like a second disc where it was a bunch of fans that kind of went on tour with them.
Yep.
And I'm watching that, I was like, that's pre real world, you know, type stuff, like the what's the word I'm looking for?
Reality
Reality
television.
TV. It was
Sure.
like reality TV, and I'm like, does anybody else know that? Like, I felt like I discovered free reality TV, real world with Depeche Mode 101, and you got to see Depeche Mode live. That and tell me, I mean, obviously it influenced you, but tell me more about that experience.
I mean, it was a great experience because arguably they were at the peak,
Oh yeah,
live band at that point. I've probably seen them, you know, half a dozen, 6, 8 times since then, and they've always been a little bit. I don't want to say worse, but
no,
I mean, you can't maintain that kind of energy forever, especially with the way that they were living during the time
oh
with.
yeah, excessive living, yeah, absolutely.
Um, but it was fantastic, and it was what was so groundbreaking about that tour was that it showed that an electronic band could perform like a rock band.
Mm,
That hadn't really happened. Most of these bands, including Depeche Mode themselves in their early days, were playing clubs,
yeah.
like we are now.
Playing on like record crates and stuff. I remember seeing
Yep.
pictures of early on when they're doing smut, like they would put their synthesizers on record crates and just
Yeah.
keep, yeah, on chairs and stuff. I was like that is a humbling thing to see, especially when you're starting out and you're going, oh, they've been through the dirt, they've been through the mud
Yeah.
of those things. Yeah.
So it was, I mean, it was really revolutionary in a way to see an electronic brand bringing kind of a stadium show. And it just, I already liked the music, but it just kind of reinforced there's an extra, I think, layer of power when you're experiencing music live. A lot of that comes from it just being super loud or whatever, but there's something different about it, and I think that just really pushed me over the edge to where it's like, yeah, this is what I want to do. And you see so many bands that was their origin, right? Like, the members of Joy Division were all at the same Sex Pistols, like not together, but they were at the Sex Pistols
At the
show,
Manchester, yep. Mm-hmm.
and I know, I think Covenant, it was the Front 242 show, and it's like, so it's so cool to see the genesis of so many bands being seeing another band perform and going, hell yeah, I want to do that.
Yeah. That's how it was with me, like with Nine Inch Nails. I think seeing Trent, just the whole group, the whole group dynamic and the energy, I was just like, I want to do that. You know what I mean? Like, just keep that energy. It was wonderful. So yeah, I know what you're talking about. So
Yeah.
tell me about because you kind of did perform live kind of numerous times. You kind of had your own synth pop project, right? Man on Stage. And then you're also doing
Yeah, I never performed live with that. That was
okay,
strictly just kind of a moniker I used while recording.
right. Tell me about getting the first time you were able to get on stage and go, okay, I'm going to take this energy that, the music I created, the energy I saw with, Depeche Mode or whatever, and just kind of get up on. Tell me about your experience about getting on stage live for the first time.
So the first time we performed live was in 1996, and it was there was I hadn't put anything out except for some compilation tracks at that time, and there was little record label called Arts Industria that was based in Indianapolis, and they'd gotten some traction in the music press with the releases they'd put out. And Ken, the guy who ran the record label, said, "Hey, why don't we do like a little showcase for the bands that played on these compilation?" And so he put together this event called Circuit Fest,
Mhm.
which hilariously there was a misprint on the tickets that said Circus Fest.
Oh no, that's awesome.
Yeah, I love it. Um, but I barely remember it because I was so scared.
Oh yeah.
And I mean, I've certainly performing live over the years has done wonders for my ability to get up in front of a room of strangers, and but at the time, that was a completely alien experience to me. And even though I really wanted to do it, I, I'm sure there's people who just naturally have the personality type where it's like,
Oh
no, no big deal. This feels right. I think for most people, it's like, I'm scared shitless. What, like, this is all going to catch fire. The wheels are going to come off and everybody's going to die. So I think I was so kind of focused on just like getting through the
don't
experience.
screw this up. Yeah.
And also, like, let's be honest, I mean, there were maybe 40, 30, 40 people there. So it wasn't like a big event by any
Right.
means.
Yeah.
For a pretty introverted person, it was kind of an alien experience, but it was really fun. And it was, I think, a year or two after that before we had performed live again, but it just kind of picked up momentum from there. But yeah, I wish I could tell you that we did that first show and there was like light shine down from the heavens, and but it was really just like, how do I get through this experience without soiling myself?
Totally understand.
Mission accomplished, by the way.
Right, mission accomplished. Very good. Tell me about, because I know you started doing music, just strictly instrumental, and then you kind of, how were you able to kind of find your voice and your courage to sing and write lyrics?
I mean, it was really born out of necessity more than anything. I grew up most of my life in rural New Hampshire. So we were in the middle of nowhere, and as you may guess, not a mecca for electronic
Oh no.
music. So I didn't even know anybody else really who was into this stuff. And I enjoyed making electronic music that was just instrumental, but they weren't they weren't instrumentals in the proper
Proper sense.
sense. They were songs that were missing vocals.
Right. I get it. Yeah.
And I just started out by, this was when I was in high school or whatever. I would just surreptitiously, when everybody was out of the house, I'd like run up to my room, fire up my 4-track cassette recorder, and I'd like record some vocals, and you know, uh, pretty much uniformly awful. But you have to start somewhere.
Got to
So
start somewhere. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
if anybody's out there like, I want to do this, but it's like, I know I suck. It's like, yes, of course you do. You suck at everything. Nobody is born with the ability to do something brilliantly out of everywhere. Everybody. The point is, you just have to suck it up and power through that stage of it, because it's part of the process. And going out and performing live helped a lot. And I'm still I still consider myself very mediocre as far as vocals go, but I've come a very long way from where I started. And I think anybody who's got the determination to do so can do it. But it's that first step that's really intimidating. And you know singing is it's a very vulnerable position to put yourself into, and lyric writing too.
Of course, absolutely.
Those two together, it's like you're bearing your soul, and it's like, oh, what if people laugh at this, or what if I do a bad job? But you just have to you just have to, accept the fact that it's like, yeah, it's going to be rough going for a while. No, but nobody needs to hear that stuff. Just
Oh, of
do
course.
it, put your time in, and get better, and you'll make progress. But that first step is a tough one.
Right. That starting out, you were using the Korg, the Poly 800, and a four track. Were you using any other like keyboard, computers or drum machines, or how were you kind of doing a full production?
So it was real primitive.
Yeah,
This was late 80s.
yeah.
And so I had the Poly 800, and I had this little shitty Korg drum machine. It was a DDM 110, like roundly considered to be one of the shittiest sounding drum
Right.
machines
Yeah.
that's ever been put out, because it was one of those early digital drum
Early
machines.
digital. Yeah.
Everything is sampled at 8-bit, and it's like the drum sounds are all like half a second long and chopped off.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yep.
Um, but I didn't really have a computer set up at that time, so I would program the drums for the song, the structure for the song, and then I would go through and I would play all the parts live
Yep.
and record each part and then bounce those down so I could clear up some more tracks. And that was also really good in helping me develop my ear and my ability to kind of figure stuff out quickly. But that stuff is, I mean, it's unlistenable. It's so, the timing is just all over the
Okay,
place.
I get it. I get it. Yeah.
But it's like I said, you gotta start somewhere, and that happens to be where I started. And um, I was really pretty slow to adapt using a DAW on a computer. It's I was doing a lot of sequencing on after that I upgraded and got a sampler, which is super kind
It's
of
great. Yeah.
important for industrial music.
Yeah.
And that had a really great multi-track sequencer on it that I would use, and that I would bounce stuff down to DAT or whatever. Um, and it was a very big shift in mentality kind of when shifting over to working on a computer. But once I got over that different way of working, it was like, how did I do things any other way? It's the convenience and the amount of time saving stuff that's available to you. I regretted not taking that leap sooner, but
Yeah.
it can be intimidating for sure.
Yeah, in the beginning, even me, because when I started doing it, it was very primitive recording process. Like it took me a while to learn about MIDI and um, you know, trying to get like I was still, trying to hook it up to a computer. I thought, well, I'll just have to use the microphone and hook it up to a I was just like, how did I get so like the convenient everything just gets more and more convenient, and I always feel like I'm a little bit behind every time. Drives me nuts. So
That lets everybody else beta test it though, so
yeah,
it gets all the kinks out. Let
right.
somebody else do that work.
Point. Um, with your songwriting process, has it always kind of stayed about the same? Where are you start with lyrics and music, or is there kind of does it is there a balance, a difference? Tell me about your songwriting process.
So I mean, it changes a little bit from
Mm,
time to time, but it almost always starts musically.
yeah,
Occasionally, it'll be a lyric that starts things, but lyric writing for me is um, it, it's difficult, and it's for me the least fun part
yeah,
of the process. Like the end result, I'm like, wow, I'm really proud with how that came out. I'm glad that I struggled through that, but I usually kind of leave that part for the last step.
right.
So it's usually, it comes out of I'll get an idea for a chord progression or a bass line or something, and I'll just quickly tap it out into my sequencer, and I'll just put it aside for a while. Um, and then once I have a number of tracks together, then I start going through those and figuring out what I want to really try and develop into a full song. And then the musical parts kind of start coming through there. And um, it used to be I had a very linear way of doing. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to work on the intro of this track until it's done. Then I'll move on to the first verse, and I'll work on that until it's done. Nowadays, I try to get more or less the full structure, like the skeleton of the song, like some basic drums, a bass, maybe some chords laid out as quickly as possible.
Right.
And then I go back and I start to add parts. Almost invariably, I add way too many to be practical. So then there becomes an additional process of self
Layered.
editing, which for me is that's one of the biggest challenges because like I have all this cool stuff I want to put in here, but I know that I really can't.
You don't want to muddy it with too much sound, you don't overlayer this. I get it because it's like you just got all these ideas and you're going to muddy it up by most people are not going to hear what you're trying to convey because you,
Exactly.
yeah, I get what you're saying. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, that's kind of what I do these days is I just try to get the basic skeleton of the song banged out as quickly as I can in a very basic form. That way I just have it there. It's recorded, it's saved, I can come back to it at any time. And um I guess the only other, I guess I don't know if it's unusual or not, but it seems to be, is that I'll usually work on like three, four, five songs at the same time. I mean, not literally at the same
No,
time,
yeah,
but
I know what you mean. You just kind of go one and then you're like, okay, I'm going to put that on the back burner. Let me jump into this one. Is that kind of
yeah,
how? Yeah. Mhm.
because you always hit these roadblocks,
Oh, yeah.
where just like you're like, I don't know what the hell to do now. And in the past it was just like, well, I guess I'll just go do something else until an idea comes to me.
Walk away. Yeah.
Um, Now what I do is I just be, all right, I'm going to put this aside and come back to it later. I'll work on this other song that I do have some ideas for, and I think that's really it's a good habit to have because it gives you the sense of forward momentum that you don't get if you're just kind of sitting in it when you're having writer's block. So because I think that can become a feedback loop where it's like, oh, it's been 2 weeks, I haven't written anything. It's like the well's gone dry. It's over, you know. So getting some wins in there by working on another song has been a really productive technique for me.
Has that always kind of been your go-to? Like if you do hit a wall or writer's block issue, have you tried to go other, form like some people be like, oh, I'll just go out, kind of walk around the woods and try and find inspiration. Like, do you have any sort of like, I hit a block, let me try and rejuvenate this sort of influence? Do you have anything like that?
Yeah, I mean, uh, kind of like what you said. It's for me. Sometimes it's just the setting.
Mm-hmm.
So getting out of that setting where I'm having the block sometimes releases the block. So like you said, it's like I'm like I'm hitting nothing with this. I'm not moving forward. I'm gonna go for a walk.
Mm-hmm.
And you go for a walk and you don't have the computer there in front of you. You don't have those things. All you have are your thoughts. And a lot of times that's when it's like, oh, you should try this. It's like, yeah, that's a good idea. I'll try that when I get back. Um, the other thing that I'll do is I'll fire up my phone and like Apple Music, and I'll just put on a Discovery Station, and I'll just start flipping around, and I'll just start to listen to things kind of with an analytic ear. So, um, not so much like, oh, I want to make a song like this, but more like, oh, they did a really interesting thing with a hi-hat there. I'm going to try that with this track and see if that is the magic that kind of pushes this forward. So, um, just trying to kind of stimulate creativity by getting some external output, because especially if you're somebody like me that works by themselves, you don't get a lot of that external output that you do when you have other band members to bounce ideas off and brainstorm with. So it's good to have alternates.
Have you ever felt more comfortable working by yourself? Because when I played drums, I was in a band and there was a lot of just button heads and stuff like that. Has that always been your just go to? I'll work by myself and just kind of have a touring band.
Yeah, I find that I usually have a pretty strong idea of what I want a track to be like,
That's how I am. Yeah.
and you know I I know that I'm capable of producing stuff by myself, and I've never really felt like, oh man, I wish that there was other people here to input stuff. Although that obviously could produce some really great results, but um, that early stage of creativity and songwriting is to me like the most vulnerable part. It's like I don't even want people in my own house to hear when I'm working on a new idea. You know, it's like I turn everything way down, and it's like I don't want, maybe this is real dumb, and I don't want anybody to hear that I'm working on this dumb thing. But uh, so it's just collaboration is not something, you know, certainly in-person collaboration is not something that's ever really um, appealed to me. Of course, you know, I've done some kind of limited collaboration just through sending stuff back and forth, which is definitely cool, but it's a different, I don't know, it's a different feeling when you produce something by yourself. It's like you take all the blame and you take all the praise for it. So, you know, if something is bad about it, that's because you made it bad. And that was something that always kind of haunted me about collaboration is like, well, what if my collaborator does something and that's the thing that makes this song not work? And I'm like, man, I told you that I didn't want to do that. You know, maybe that's childish, but
No,
I usually have a very definitive idea of how I want things to be. And um, I also don't, you know, I want to spend my time making music because that's the thing that brings me joy. And arguing with somebody else about stuff, especially because I am very stubborn
okay.
and very passionate about music and stuff like that. So like why spend time arguing with friends when you can just create your vision the way that you want it, and that can kind of live or die as that.
No, I get it. And a lot of your songs, very vulnerable, very emotional, especially even the first track that I think kind of became your club hit or whatever was about your father. And how do you come to those sort of uh what's the word I'm looking for? Where you have the confidence to kind of put it out there. And what was probably the most hardest song that you've ever written? Emotionally difficult, whatever it may be for you. What was the hardest song that you've ever written?
I mean, disappoint would have to be at the top of the list.
Yeah.
You know, my dad's death really marked a significant shift. I mean, death is always difficult to realize, but when it's a preventable death and it's an unexpected death, I think that is a lot more traumatic. And you know, if you go back and you listen to like Contempt or any of the compilation stuff that came out before it, I feel like the lyrical mood is much different. There's more angry songs, I guess, and I think I felt, like you said, I think at that time I felt too vulnerable to kind of explore the more emotional and vulnerable side of things. But um, you know, my dad took his life, and it really shook me and turned my world upside down. And my whole life, creativity has been kind of how I work through difficult times. It's an escape for me, and I wrote I started writing Disappoint, I think the week after he died. Like it was I had a basic song that I thought was pretty good, and I came up with some lyrics. And it's it's tough writing stuff like that because you kind of relive it
Yes.
while you're creating it. But it's also incredibly cathartic because it's like, okay, I've kind of purged this. It's like it's not like it didn't happen, but it's like I've kind of put things down on paper. I put my thoughts here, and I don't need to carry that around inside me as this sort of unresolved ball of black goo. Like I can move on. And that was really an eye-opening experience for me because I didn't really expect to feel that way. I felt it was a compulsion. I was like, I need to get this out, and this is the way that it's going to go. And in fact, I was so unsure of how this would be received. That's why that album is called Failure.
Yeah.
It was kind of tongue in cheek because I was like, this is a shift in the sound of the first album, which we got some good press with and some good
Great crush,
exposure.
yeah.
Um, and so I was like, I'm just as a in joke to myself, I'm just going to call this failure. And then if it failed, then reviewers can say like, oh, the aptly named, and everybody gets a laugh. Um, but what I found that I didn't expect, because I just wrote those songs for myself and as a way of processing those emotions myself. When we went out and started performing it live, and to this day, this happens every show. Like you could set your watch to it. At least one person, oftentimes many people, come up at the end of the night and they mention that song, and it's because they lost a brother or a mother or a spouse or someone that way, or even that they were standing on that precipice themselves and they were struggling with how to go forward. And I didn't expect that. I that and that was that really kind of emphasized to me that I felt like I was on the right track. It's like you should. This is a positive thing to do because before I was creating music, I was a huge music fan. Like I just that's when I was in high school. Any penny I earned went right to the record store. Like,
Yep.
um, and so for me, I had already experienced that with other bands of where where you hear something that really crystallizes an emotion that you're having difficulty conveying, and you're like, it's a good feeling as a music listener, and realizing that I could simultaneously deal with difficult things in my own life and create that connection with the listener, which can be very difficult to do.
Oh, sure.
It just said to me, yeah, this is where your strength is. This is where you need to go with this project.
It became a shock to you that it became kind of like a hit through, to fans. Were people playing it in clubs and stuff? Was that like a what the hell? Or am I hearing this in a goth club right now? Like, was that a shock to you?
It was, yeah, it was. I mean, it was a cool shock for
Yeah, I
sure.
mean, I get it. Don't get me wrong. I'm like, hey, people are listening, but man, you're just like, this is a heartfelt song, and you guys are, playing it in a club. Like, it's just like it's got to be a shock.
Yeah. I mean, it is kind of a weird
Yeah,
balance of things, right? Because it's here people are dancing and drinking and having a good time, and that's how they're spending their time off. And you're listening to me talking about my dad killing himself.
right. Yeah.
That's pretty strange, I guess. But um, yeah, it was strange, but it really, in the end, it gave me a good feeling. The more of these people that I met who were like, thanks for writing that song. It really helped me get through my own experience with this, and um, took me back to when I was only a music listener, and I felt those feelings, and um, it's one of the great powers of music is that you can build a connection with somebody that you've never met through a shared experience, and I think in a lot of ways that's what all great art is it's an exploration of a shared experience, because otherwise people can't relate to it. They're like, I don't know what you're talking about. I can't relate to this at all. um but so it made me feel good at that point. It feels strange to have a dance club song about the death of a loved one, but talking to people and knowing that it helped them, it made me feel good to be able to be on that side of the equation for once, where it's like I'm not taking that from somebody else's music, somebody's taking it from something I created.
Tell me about starting your relationship with Metropolis Records. How did they get a hold of you? Did you get a hold of them? How did that work out for you?
It's a long story, but I'll give
Yeah,
the uh,
the gist.
the Cliff's Notes version. Um, so the first two A23 albums came out on a small Canadian label called Gashed Records. Um, Contempt came out and got a really good reception. And I should note that before this, I'd been putting compilation tracks out for, you know, years and sending demos out to labels and just not hearing anything back, getting rejected and stuff like that. Um, so it was a big change from just like I can't get anybody to like individual people tell me that they like this stuff, and it gets good reviews when I send demos out to get reviewed, but I'm not making the progress I want to. So it was very well received. And then Failure came out, and everything just kind of blew up there. And uh, Gashed was one guy.
Yeah.
He had like an artist that he worked with and stuff like that, but it was one guy, and it was not his full-time job, and he just wasn't equipped for that the kind of next step there. So I expressed that to him. I had a contract, I think, for 3 albums, and I said I'd really like to get released from my contract and do this next release with a bigger label, because I don't feel like the infrastructure is here for me to grow the way that I can.
Smart.
And that didn't go well.
Oh no.
Lawyers got involved, and there was a lot of chest puffing back and forth. But we couldn't come to an agreement, and what he ended up doing was he ended up just selling my contract, the remainder of my contract, to Metropolis.
Cool.
Dave was excellent, and like he contacted me first. He's like, "Here's what's going on, but I don't want to do this if you don't want a part of it." And I was like, "No, this is actually what I wanted in the first place." But um, and it was very noticeable from the start. It was like no disrespect at all to Gashed Records. I wouldn't be here talking to you about this if it wasn't for them, and he did a lot of great work for me, but the reality was he couldn't upscale to where things needed to be, and Metropolis already had that in place. So it was very noticeable. The press that they had in place and everything was just really organized and ready to go. So it felt good to not stress about that part. No, I could just concentrate on making the next album and hopefully building on what I'd built on prior.
Right. No, and you've stuck with Metropolis. You're still part of the Metropolis
Mm-hmm.
that, and it's definitely one of my favorites to go to if I'm looking for anything. Wax Tracks is the classic, obviously, and
Of course,
kind
yeah.
of sold their bits to other, but with Metropolis, like that's always been my default label to go and find new industrial music, new electronic music, and they always have great remixes, and you're remixing all kinds of stuff. Like it's a fantastic. If anybody's watching this and they don't know much about Metropolis, dig deep because it's an amazing label. So
And there's there's hundreds of artists on there by now. They've been around such a long time. So I mean, there's literally you'll find something you like on there. Maybe it'll take you a while, but you'll for sure find something you like.
every time. And you got a strong discography. How do you decide how to put together a set list when you're going live?
So I mean, now it's a lot easier because we have 20 years of
Experience.
plus music to choose from, and um, each album had some songs that kind of made some traction. So you always know that there's going to be the songs that people want to hear. Um, I think over the years you develop an instinct for what's going to translate live. you know uh, Live performance is kind of a feedback loop between you and the audience, where you're putting out energy that excites the audience, their energy comes up, that excites you, and it ideally that's in the perfect world, that's how it should work.
Yeah.
So through trial and error you realize some things work well in a live environment and some things don't, and some of that is also just emblematic of being a dance oriented band. It's like if you play a set and half of the songs are the down tempo things, people are probably going to be a little miffed at you. But so it just comes out of experience and performing live a lot and figuring out what works the best, and then trying to build a collection of songs that where the energy kind of peaks at a certain point. You know, you want to maintain that energy and momentum through the length of the set, hopefully. So you that's why the bands always have the songs you really want to hear at the end. They're building to that,
Building
to
too. You want
kind
people
of
to stick around. You don't want to hear, Stairway to Heaven at the beginning, and then everybody, it just, yeah.
like, all right, what I needed. I'm out of here.
Um, how has the electronic and industrial scene changed since you started, and where do you see it going?
I mean, how long do you have?
Right.
It's changed in almost every way. Some for the better and some for the worse. Like the music industry is unrecognizable from where it was before. It used to be you put out a record, you go out on the road and you perform live and you try and sell a bunch of records. And now records aren't really in the equation anymore. I mean, streaming is there to an extent, but it's not really that's more akin, I would say, to radio than it is to like sales of stuff. Um, but I totally lost my train of thought. Sorry.
Okay.
We were talking about
The scene, the industrial.
oh, right, the changes that have come. So that's changed, but the whole digital thing has changed. The way that bands promote themselves. It used to be primarily going out and playing shows, but now, for emerging artists, you're really expected to be a social media content creator.
Yep.
And um, it's great. You have the tools to do that for free or at very low cost. You have the potential to really reach a lot of people. That doesn't always mean the reality of that. But it also means that's time that I'm not making music.
Yep.
So I don't know. I think I would have a very tough time if I was just getting established now with that, of justifying. It's like I'm having to spend just as much time making social media posts as I am music, and that's not fun for me.
Right.
But also I would say the other big change is the shift from physical hardware instruments to computer based and software instruments has really changed things because it's lowered the barrier of entry. Back in the day, you go out and you buy a synthesizer for, $1,500, $2,000 or whatever. Guess what? That's your synthesizer because you can't afford another one, and you're going to learn to use it inside and out, and that's going to be your one piece of gear. Now, I mean, there's hundreds of free instruments that you can just download, and a lot of them are great and as good as any paid instrument. There's free DAWs that people can use. In the beginning there was a high barrier of entry with just cost, but also with developing the technical knowledge, and that still exists a little bit. But you also have YouTube where you can find tutorials on any topic under the sun like that. So you have the tools that a musician has available to them now are better than they ever have been. The flip side of that is everybody else has access to that too. So yes, it's an advantage for you as a musician and a creative person to have access to these things. Is it an advantage that you have over the other people trying to do the same thing? Not really. So I mean, it's changed a lot. And at the end of the day, if you're an up and coming band, you need to really know that you're doing it because you love it. It's fun. It's passionate. Because, not to discourage anybody, I would never discourage anybody from making music. I think it's one of the most valuable things that you can have in your life as a person. But manage your expectations, because you're probably statistically you're probably not going to make it.
Right. Yep.
And so if all you care about is I want to be a rock star up on the stage with thousands of screaming people, you're setting yourself up for pretty big disappointment. So, but if you love doing what you're doing, it doesn't matter if there's a million people listening to you or one person doing it. It's the process itself that's the real gift, and all that other stuff is just kind of the gravy.
Yep, absolutely. You went on to become one of the most successful American industrial acts of all time. What makes you stand out above the rest, and what kind of keeps you going?
You know, I think with a lot of things with the music industry, it just came down to timing.
Hmm.
You know, because I'd been, like I kind of mentioned before, I'd been sending demos out for like 10 years prior to when I finally uh signed, and it was really frustrating. And you know, part of that was because I had a very low tech setup and it wasn't really ready for prime time. But the other part of that was, at the time I was trying to get established, I was doing purely electronic stuff with like EBM and synth pop in it. And what was happening in the United States was kind of the cold wave metal guitars, like bands like 16 Volt, the Reconstriction label, all that kind of stuff. And if you didn't make that kind of stuff, it was tough to get an American label to kind of give you a shot. And that just shifted eventually, you know, where Metropolis played a big part of that too, and Wax Trax as well, in terms of bringing these European bands and influences to the United States, to where they started to infiltrate playlists, and they built an audience for it. So, you know, I had been making this kind of music for a long time, but I had to wait until the audience was there for it, to kind of go anywhere with it. So, um, you know, it's sad how little success in the music industry really has to do with talent.
Yeah.
I mean, I wouldn't even say it's in the top five things necessarily. Like, it really, you can't underestimate the power of luck and just being in the right place at the right time. That's so that is the vital key in almost every band's big success story. Is there's some defining moment where they were just there at the right time and things took off. And that, you know, you can't control that. So do it because it brings you happiness, and anything else beyond that is just going to be a bonus.
I agree. Are there any other artists or bands that you've admired that you feel influenced by, any modern ones that you've looked and you go, oh, they're doing what they're doing, you know, like any modern bands that you're influenced by?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I feel like the strongest influences are always those initial ones,
Mhm.
because it's that feeling of when you hear something and you're like, hell, I've never heard anything like that in my life. What is that?
Right.
And the sad part of when you're a really voracious music fan is that as the years go on, you get less of that feeling and
Yeah.
more of like, how do I find, like, it's like a heroin addict, you
Yeah.
know, they talk
Yes, I
about
was about to say that. Yeah.
chasing the dragon, right? It's like you never feel as good as you do the first time that you do it. So, and addicts are always trying to chase that. And I that's the same thing for me, is I'm always in this sort of uh, you know, futile quest to get that same feeling the first time I heard New Order or Depeche Mode or The Cure or you know, any Bad Gadget, any of these bands that were influential to me in the early days. And you get pieces of that and stuff that there's stuff that I really love, but it's you just don't get that same um, revolutionary kind of earth-shaking feeling very often after that. So, you know, for me, it's still. And here's the other interesting thing about that too, is, you know, as an artist who's been around for a couple decades now, everything comes in cycles, right? So, you know, growing up as a kid in the 80s music is a huge source of inspiration and influence for me. Well, now we're in the 2020s, and 80s are coming back by kids who weren't even alive
Yeah. My
during
kids
the
are
80s. But those influences, they're just rediscovering those records. And now those are coming out, but filtered through the sensibility of a kid who grew up in, you know, the 2010s or something like that.
in.
And so I'm finding that really interesting, too. So it's, you know, nowadays it's a lot of when I find inspiration and stuff like that, a lot of times it's really outside of the kind of music that I make.
Mhm.
You know, a good example, there's a guy named John Tejada who does, he kind of started out as a house music artist, but he kind of treads the line between house and techno kind of stuff. But I just love the way his tracks are put together and the way they build and the sound. He uses a lot of like analog synths and stuff like that. And um, I like stuff like that. The stuff that gets me excited these days is when I can hear something where I'm like, how the fuck did they do that? You
Thank
know,
you.
it's like it's so much stuff when you become a musician, it changes the way that you listen to music. You know,
Right.
you pick things apart. You don't hear a song as kind of a whole. You hear it as like,
Bits, pieces.
yeah,
Yeah.
it's like, ooh, I like what the bass guitar is doing there and how that's playing against the bass drum. That's really cool.
Hmm.
Um, but yeah, it's tough to get that feeling back of that first time that you've heard something that was like nothing you'd ever heard from before.
Chasing
So
the musical dragon.
so for me, it's a matter of just trying to expose myself to stuff that I haven't styles of music that I haven't heard before, and 80% of it, I'll be like, that's not for me. But maybe I'll hear something and I'll be like, that's interesting though. Like, I wonder if I could incorporate that into something that I can do.
Yeah, that's what I've been kind of challenging myself with 2025, where I started doing a challenge where they have a book or a list of the 1,001 albums to listen to before you die.
Hmm.
And each couple of years they'll revise it. So now I think, you know, there's some that they add each couple of years, and now it's up to 1,089 albums to listen to before you die. So I did the math on that, and if I do it for a whole year, I have to listen to 3 albums a day. So yeah, I
Yeah.
know. So which is not that difficult for me because I'm always listening to music and stuff like that. Um, so I will at random draw a number that's on the list, and then I will go to the album. And so I've been doing like 3 albums a day. So it's something different that I'm listening to each day, and it's really just kind of been like, you try not to be like genre phobic or anything like that, where you're trying to go
Mhm.
stay on these different paths. And it's really just kind of like branched out so much. I mean, unfortunately, in the beginning, it was like I felt like I was listening to almost every album by Bob Dylan because he's got so many on the
Yeah.
list,
Yeah.
the Beatles and stuff. But you'll find one where it's just, free improvisational jazz piano. And I'm like, I'm just overwhelmed with emotions just by hearing this. And you're like, you know, it's important to kind of branch out musically to go, okay, I like this. I'm feeling something from this. Now, how can I take that and kind of translate it into what I'm working on right now? You know what I
For
mean?
sure. For sure.
Yeah. Do you have a favorite memory or moment from your career that stands out the most?
I don't know. I mean, there's been so many, but probably probably one of the coolest moments was we got to play the big stage at Mariluna one year, which is I think 25,000 people,
Oh,
which was many times the largest crowd that we'd ever played
right.
for
Yeah.
before. And it was the first time in a long time that I got stage fright. Like I felt like somebody had punched the air out of me. And then having that moment where you hear the crowd after the first song come back, and I was like, okay,
Okay. Yeah.
yeah, okay, I can do
They
this.
want
This is
me
gonna
here.
be
They want
really,
me here. Right. Yeah.
yeah. But that was great. We got to open for Orchestral Maneuvers in the Dark in Spain.
Oh,
Um,
beautiful.
and
Back around. Back around. Life does that sometimes.
yeah,
You saw
they were the opener at
they were
that
the opener. Yeah. Yeah.
Depeche Mode concert. So yeah, there've been a lot of really amazing moments for sure.
That's so great. You got to open. That's great. Do you have any pre-show rituals that you do?
A lot of nervous peeing.
Yes. Yes, a lot of
Um,
nervous bowel movements. That happens when I do live and sometimes before I do a podcast, especially if it's someone I'm nervous to talk to. It's like, all right, here we go. Yeah, I get it. Yep.
not much beyond that. I kind of get in my own head before shows, so I'm not super social before going on. I just kind of want to get in the headspace for performing and get there.
Yeah. Do you listen to anything musically to kind of pump yourself up at all?
Not really. Yeah, I mean, there's usually music playing in the environment we're in anyway, that because DJs and that sort of thing. But
It's awesome.
yeah, it's mostly just getting in the headspace.
You have a degree in TV and film. Do you still use those as, to get, as a form of, kind of doing different styles? Like, do you do it, would you want to do like TV and movie work and stuff like that?
I put my time in, and I used to be a video editor. I worked in advertising. I did a lot of TV commercials and that sort of stuff. Um, I was glad for my time in doing it, but it's something you really ought to be passionate about doing, and I just wasn't. Um, so, I mean, to me, the day job is always going to be the means to provide for me to do music with. So it's not. I don't look at my day job as something that's I have to be passionate about. It's something that's
Bring
going
in the
to
money.
support the things that I'm passionate about.
My last question is, usually I let everybody know, hey, what's your best advice to give anybody who's just starting out and watching this, like musically or artistically?
Uh, like I said before, do it because you love it and because it makes you happy.
Yep.
That's the big one. The second big one I would say on top of that is keep at it.
Yep.
Nothing has destroyed more bands than just giving up.
Yep.
You hear these stories of bands that almost give up and then they have that one show or that one record that changes everything. And that puts more people out of the running than just being rejected by a label. It's just giving up too soon. So do it because you love it, and keep doing it, because persistence really really can pay off.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, thank you so much, Tom. I really appreciate your
Thank
time.
you.
Take it easy. Thank you so much. You have a great year, buddy.
You too, man. It's great talking to you.
Trying you too.